Okay. Our video guy is not here. Can't start until the video guy's here. I don't know where I'm at. Can we start? Great. Okay.
Get the time change then.
Welcome to the CEO finalist interviews for the OPPD Board of for the OPPD Board of Directors. If we can have roll call, please.
Barrett.
Yes.
Kavanaugh.
Here.
Gay.
Here.
Green. Hurley.
Here.
McGuire. Here. Mines. Ulrich.
Here.
2. Notice of the time and place of this meeting was publicized by notifying the area news media, by publicizing same in the Omaha World Herald, by displaying such notice on the arcade level of Energy Plaza since March 5th, 2015, and by mailing such notice to each of the district's directors on that same date. A copy of the proposed agenda for this meeting has been maintained on a current basis and is readily available for public inspection in the office of the district's corporate secretary. Additionally, a copy of the open meetings law is available for inspection in the public meeting book located in this meeting room.
So move.
Second.
Okay. Now I'm going to read the rules of engagement for the interviews. You should have all received a packet upon entering the room. The second page of the packet are the rules of engagements for the open meeting interviews and the public forum. All of the open meeting interviews, there will be no public comment period during all this time. Forms have been provided in the back of the packet to provide any comments you may have. There are also extra forms in the front of the corporate secretary to take at the end of the interview. These forms can be turned into the corporate communications will be available at the back exits at the end of each interview session. If you need more time, feedback may also be provided by completing the same forms via oppdlistens.com through March 13th, 2015. Nebraska Public Records may require OPPD to provide to interested persons, including members of the news media, copies of your communications to us, including your name and other contact information. The public will be able to participate in one-on-one sessions with each finalist in an open public forum on March 9th, that's tomorrow, 2015. Details regarding this forum are also on the rules of engagement. As far as the process itself, after the board decided to restart the president and the CEO selection, the position description was posted through various professional outlets and through the recruiting firm hired by OPPD on February 6th through February 13th. All applicants' skills and experiences were assessed against the candidate profile and the position description. I, as chair of board of directors, facilitated the review of potential applicants for the position of the president and the CEO of the district with individual directors. The finalists were determined based on input from the board members and their names, and resumes were then posted on the OPPD Listens website. Now, I would like to turn the meeting over to Director Mike Kavanaugh, chair of the governance committee, to start the interview.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Burke, just to let you know, we have a set of structured questions we will ask, probably in a rotational basis from amongst the board. And then there will obviously be additional follow-up questions based upon your answers and so forth. Okay, our first question is, each member of the board has reviewed your resume, so we have some familiarity with your experience. With that in mind, would you spend about 5 minutes providing an overview of the most pertinent aspects of your experience and abilities as it relates to being OPPD's president and CEO?
Sure. Thank you very much. I think I would characterize my service, at least in my resume anyway, around customer service and around employees and around community activity, including economic development. Early on in my career, I've been in the utility industry for almost 33 years, starting this coming May. And so originally when I started in that business, I was on the customer service side. I was actually a customer representative that also did relief meter reading. So I would actually go out in the field and actually do meter reading. And it was on the gas and electric side. So it was a great opportunity for me to really understand that piece of the business. As I kind of progressed in that first company that I was with, I was able to do electric kind of service designing related work. I would do estimates for large and middle-sized customers, and then did a lot of, as the industry was deregulating on the natural gas side, really got actively involved in the deregulating side of the natural gas business and the gas marketing and sales side. And so my work around regulatory related work, I actually crafted, along with the team, the first economic development rate in the state of Iowa at the time, back in, it would have been 1984 or something like that. And so worked with the team to kind of create that, and then was actively involved in economic development and community involvement. The Speakers Bureau and public relations was part of my role in northern Iowa. When I moved with Peoples Natural Gas Company out of the Des Moines office, I specifically focused on industrial gas sales and technical sales. But obviously it was when the natural gas business was deregulating at a fairly large rate, and so got involved in energy supply, gas supply, balancing, a variety of different services. And then became the Director of Business Development, and with that came economic development in the state of Iowa. So I was part of a team that was on the Leadership Iowa advisory group for the governor at that time, which, by the way, was Governor Branstad. So funny how things kind of come around. And so we did a variety of training at the 18 different independent colleges and university around community leadership. That has been kind of a theme with me as I've kind of transitioned from Peoples Natural Gas in Iowa to Peoples Natural Gas in Nebraska, as I led the Nebraska operations as president and general manager of Peoples Natural Gas Company. Continued my involvement in community, a variety of different activities, civic work. Was on Governor Ben Nelson's Energy Advisory Council at the time, one of the first energy plans that was created back in the, I would say probably the mid-'80s, or late 80s anyway, probably 88 or 89 timeframe. Actively involved in economic development, but then I had the operational background where I actually had the operations of a natural gas system and pipeline operations. I still had responsibility for regulatory affairs, so I was comfortable in those settings and opportunities, whether it be on the rate setting side or whether it would be on the community interaction side. Again, in the state of Nebraska, and Mr. Bruckner knows this pretty well, we would actually have to go to the city councils and get rate approval. And then we went to rate areas to get rate approval, and then since then they've changed a variety of different ways on the regulatory framework where rates could be approved. Well, my activity was really around the operating side of the business, and that was really my first kind of take for going from sales and marketing to customer service into operations. Then when I came to OPPD in 1997, I kind of was responsible for the customer service piece of the organization, but then the storm of 1997 occurred. October 26th, by the way, 1997, very clear in my mind.
I remember that date.
I know you do. I know you do. I think we all do. Certainly at OPPD we do. But I think that was the defining point of OPPD, where we began to consolidate customer service functions and really began to drive what I would consider an excellence model in customer service delivery, and certainly we're recognized for that nationally and internationally for that matter. And so I've had the opportunity to kind of create that and develop that, created our sales and marketing, our products and service development. Had the opportunity to be the vice president of our transmission distribution operation and our customer service side, so looked at the opportunity to streamline our operations and that kind of customer operations. It was kind of our first forte into what I would consider continuous process improvement, which is something I'm accountable for now here at OPPD. And then as I've kind of had that opportunity, I've had the opportunity to participate in being the vice president responsible for the HR part of the organization as well. And so the creation of a diversity program, creation of our recruitment of key talent, with senior managers being actively involved, as I am at Kansas State, on the Power Affiliates Board, but certainly in actively recruiting at Kansas State for primarily mechanical, nuclear kinds of graduates that support us at Fort Calhoun. But then also I've had the opportunity to do a number of different things, which includes environmental, our continuous process improvement, or our lean initiative, our corporate safety and technical training, where we've seen significant improvements. And then obviously with the corporate communications and marketing, the opportunity for us to really kind of lay out our stakeholder process, which is being recognized. We were on 2 conference calls last week with a utility on the East Coast and a utility on the West Coast, talking about how we're doing the things we're doing relative to stakeholder input. So that's kind of my background.
Okay. Tim, could you talked about stakeholders. Could you discuss or talk about an example that you've engaged stakeholders to advance the work of OPPD?
Well, I'll give a couple examples, and the most obvious one was in our future generation plans, so I won't give you the obvious one right away. But the one that I think really began us down this path, even before the board approved the stakeholder process, is when we started our in-home electric protection program, where we essentially work with a third-party provider to do the delivery of that service through local contractors. And one of the things that we said is, in order for us to do that program, we wanted to reach out to the local electricians in the community to essentially get their feedback, their perspective, and their buy-in in that process. Because we certainly didn't want to have their great resources for us. Many of them work for us in one way or another at OPPD, and certainly we didn't want to create that conflict. And after we had several meetings with them, it was really an opportunity for us to essentially say, hey, here's a way for us to partner. And it was during the start of the downturn of the economy. And actually, the feedback I've heard from several of those folks is, if it really wasn't, if it wasn't for the OPPD program, we would have struggled and probably had to lay off people, because of the program that you put together and the work that we're doing with that really created a win-win situation. So we went to those folks that deliver those services, and then we also brought in those folks to look at how we would deliver that service with our service partner. That was a great example of how we use that, and we use that model in every product and service that we've done. Our air conditioning management program is an example of that. And I think the one that has probably had the most strategic impact has been our future generation plan, where we spent months and months working with a variety of different stakeholders, internally, externally, to really create what I believe is a one-in-a-kind, at least, that we've seen anyway, stakeholder process that really drove a strategic execution of a generation plan.
Great. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Tim, I got a question for you. If you would become CEO, you'd have to work with the board of directors, of course. How would you describe how that relationship would go and the role of CEO and the board?
Well, I would look forward to have the opportunity to work directly with you and for you in that regard. I think a couple things. One of the comments that I'll make tomorrow night is really around transparency, and I think that transparency starts with making sure that we share with the board all the things that are going on within the organization. And it's easy to share the good things. It's maybe tougher to share the tougher things, the bad things, the things that aren't going well, the things that aren't meeting plan. But I think that's where we don't get to share with you the greatness of the OPPD workforce, because it's when we have those unique situations where we may not be hitting plan, we may not be performing as well as we should be performing. What happens when we address those things appropriately, there is an immediate uptick and a performance improvement. And our employees have the capability to do that, there's no doubt in my mind. But kind of a problem defined as a problem half solved, and then creating that plan and executing that plan for that improvement, I think shows the board and the community the greatness that we have in this organization. And so sometimes you don't get to see that. Sometimes the public doesn't get to see that. But it's a great opportunity when we're able to share that, and I think that's a good news story that not only does the board need to know and hear more about, but also the public as well.
Tim, describe your experience establishing a culture with a strong organizational and personal accountability, and how would you plan on maintaining that type of culture?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So I may not have to speak at all tomorrow night because you're taking most of the things. I'm going to have to change now just a little bit. But thanks for leading right into that. I think as we think about this organization, one of the things I'm probably the most proudest of is that whether it was through the Q12 or whether it was through the Quantum Culture Survey that we did, I'm going to talk a little bit about me and my business unit, but then I'll share how I think it essentially is applicable across the organization. My business unit had the highest favorable ratings across the organization of the business unit that I have, and I think there's reasons for that I'll share. And it was in the Q12 the same way. When we were doing the Gallup Q12, and it is in this Quantum survey. And actually, we're just 1 or 2 points below the best places to work kind of category, which is not even in the utility category. It's across all businesses. So I feel very strongly about that. Why do I think what do I think drives that? I think it's the work that I do with our employees, and I'll give you just some examples with that. I do 12 roundtables with 12 to 15 employees every month. And part of that, we talk about what are the roadblocks and what are the victories that are going on in the organization. And why do I do that? Because in our organization and any organization, there's always unintended kind of layers of clay that occur that doesn't always get information up and doesn't always get information down. And it's an opportunity for me to kind of sense what's being communicated and what are the issues out in the in the organization. And so I'm able to identify things early that's going on in my business unit that we're able to put plans together and address and change and modify and take action on. So my plan would be to continue that. My plan would be to continue to do 12 to 15 roundtables throughout the organization. And as I talk to the other senior team members, I would essentially make that part of their key accountabilities as well, as it's part of my key accountabilities within the organization. And that they would do 12 roundtables with their employees within their business units. But then the twist that I would do that I think is really unique and different is that we would have each senior manager do that in another business unit. One, to share their perspective from their specific business unit's responsibility, but also begin to hear maybe different things that a vice president of that business unit that I may not be able to hear. And so I think that's going to be kind of important to do. And I think that's the way we identify things early so we can address those concerns and not get into a performance crisis kind of perspective. The other thing that I do is 3 to 4 business unit meetings where we talk about what's going on in the business unit. What are the good things going on? What are the things that we need to improve? And how do we need to do that? Historically, I've met with every new employee in my business unit. That started in about 2002. Any new employee, part-time contract, full-time, that comes into my business unit, I sit down with them for about a half an hour, 45 minutes. My kids would call that, I give them the speech 23. My kids coined it speech 23, so I didn't have to talk as long for them. And it was really about, the speech with the kids was about what it means to be a Burke. But what I work with employees on is what does it mean to be an employee of OPPD? And to talk a little bit about that commitment and about how people will perceive them differently in the community because they work for OPPD, and that their actions outside of work also reflect on OPPD. But it's a great opportunity for me to set that stage with new employees. And it's an opportunity for me to find out where people come from, what educational levels they have, what they're interested in doing in the organization. Now, I'm not sure I'll be able to do it in that same way as we hire 150 or 200 or 300 people, but I don't actually have a solution with that yet, but I will work on that because I think that's really important for the CEO of the organization to begin to lay that groundwork of what the expectations are.
Just to follow up on that just for a minute, would that also include not just people in this building, but like at power plants, rural
absolutely.
offices, around the area, not just in the metro area?
Oh, absolutely. It's across the organization, from Fort Calhoun to the Blair office to the Humboldt office. I think one of the things that a couple of years ago we heard from our employees is we used to have them come to a central spot where there, people from the South would come to the Papillion Center. We'd have a group meeting there. And they said, rather than all of us traveling up there, why don't you come to us? It's like, yeah, why don't I do that?
Just what I was thinking.
That's a great idea. And so we've been doing that for the last couple of years, and I think it's been very positive, and I think they've appreciated it. And it's been a great opportunity for me to share what's going on corporately, what's going on in our business unit, but also really the opportunity for me to listen and hear and hear what's going on, and for me from the executive level, be able to make changes in my business unit or recommend changes corporately.
And another follow-up, just our audience might not know what Q12 or the quantum survey is, if you could explain that.
So it's those surveys are surveys that allow you to get a sense on the culture of the organization. And so Q12 measured engagement of the employees. Quantum does too, very similar. They do it in just a little different way. I think the Quantum folks were actually offshoots of Q12 folks, I think is how it actually worked. But it's just a way for us to get a measure of the organization about what's going on in the organization. Is it good? Is it bad? What things do we need to do to improve it? And so my team at our staff meeting on Friday kind of went over that, and they're asked to bring back their kind of improvement plans that they need to share with their employees to make sure that we can kind of improve that culture needle within our business unit by the end of April. And so we're creating those plans and the execution around that, and that'll become part of their key accountability. So how do you drive accountability in the organization? You make people accountable for it, and then you hold them accountable for it.
John, I think you're up next.
Yeah. I apologize for being late. I was on Irish Standard Time. what we do here is pretty significant and complex at times. And there are things that are required by law and required by custom or contractual requirements to stay confidential. And confidentiality is important in an organization like this. But at some point in time, there's kind of been what you would call mission creep, that it's crossed over from confidentiality into kind of a aura of secrecy. If we were to grant you this job, how would you go about trying to bring that back into where it should be and not where it currently has been?
That's a great question, and I won't have to speak at all on Monday, maybe, but here are some of my thoughts. And it goes back with some of the experiences that I had working for People's Natural Gas Company, where we had advisory groups. Actually, Del Weber was part of the People's Natural Gas Advisory Group, where we got that kind of public perspective and input. But I would conduct annual meeting-like events throughout OPPD service territory. And my plan would be we would do 4 a year, and over a couple-year period of time, we could be in each one of the directors' districts to talk about what's going on at OPPD. Because at the board meetings, we typically do board action and maybe some topical kinds of things, but it's to really get out there and to share what's going on at OPPD and to bring the senior team in that have an incredible amount of expertise and knowledge about this industry. I mean, we truly are leaders in this industry. So we have a great senior management team that we would get in front of the public along with the representative board member or board members and some of the subject matter expert to talk about what's going on in our industry, to talk about the things that we're thinking about, the things that we're doing, why we did the things we did, explaining kind of how we go about doing certain things, and then talking about the future and about the things that we're looking at and the things that may be coming up, and give them an opportunity to kind of hear a little bit more and deeper about OPPD. And I reflect on some of the new board members saying, this is a far more complex industry than I thought. Than I first kind of saw. And I think that's an opportunity for us to share that with the public. We heard that very clearly in the stakeholder process, and it's a great opportunity, I think, for us to educate, but again, also obtain information from the public. So that would be one area that I would do, is to certainly get out and begin to have that conversation with the public and the community. I would conduct quarterly media briefings. And do that very clearly. Just sit down with the media and say, what are your questions? Here's what's going on. Here's what we've done over the past several months. Here are the things that we're looking at and the things that we're going to be having to kind of put in place and the things that we're working on. What do you hear? What do you want to ask? And just become far more open in that dialogue, and to do it proactively, not reactively, because when it's reactively, I think there's always that kind of defense kind of mechanism in place. And so my kind of role would be to do it in a proactive nature. And then the last thing that I would do is get our senior team actively involved in what's going on in the community to talk about OPPD in a variety of different venues, whether that's the Kiwanis, the Lions, or the Rotaries, or the OTAC group, or whoever that may be, is to have that opportunity for us to talk about things in the public more readily, more often, more detailed and deeper than we do today. That'd be my example of the actions that I would put in place to improve kind of that transparency and to get away from that secrecy kinds of perspectives. Because I would share with you from the senior team, we have no intention to be secret. But I think what's happened over a period of time, the concept of transparency and the expectations of transparency is changing. It's changing with board members. It's changing with the public. It's changing with the media. It's changing with our customers and partners. And so just like in the customer service model that I've had the opportunity to work with our team to kind of bring to excellence, we would look at this and drive that kind of transparency excellence in our service territory.
We've kind of gotten off script a little bit, just so we can kind of stay in the same in order. Let me step in on this question before you go, Tom. Tim, what methodology do you use to evaluate the financial success of the organization?
Well, I think corporately what we have traditionally looked at is our debt service coverage. Rate parity is another example. How do our rates compare from commercial, industrial, residential, and is there parity among those rates? But certainly debt service coverage is one of those specific metrics of financial that certainly the financial industry, the investors, rating agencies look at very clearly is that are we able to cover our debt service, and what does that look like? There's a variety of other metrics that the rating agencies look at, but revenue growth, cost containment, are we able to contain cost? Are we within our benchmarks of our industry peers on cost per customer or cost per revenue or cost per megawatt hour? So it's a variety of different benchmarks around cost that we traditionally have looked at. But debt service coverage is the one that we look at corporately relative to how well are we doing corporately around our financial framework.
I got a follow-up question to that. On the financial success, I know it's very complex of what you talked about, debt coverage and other things, and how we set rates has to be fair to a whole host of things. And I like your idea of educating the public on a better basis, because that's one of the things I would encourage you to do if you get this job on a financial end. It's complex. The question is this: ratepayers look at financial success as low rates, okay? So it's pretty much, I don't want my rates to go up, and I want to keep power on all the time. I mean, they get it within reason, but how do you get away from, or how should we judge ourselves rate-wise? I think we're doing better, but we challenge you to do better. What about rates, and when you say financial success, how do we get a measure on that issue?
You know, what we look at, and I'll tell you what we do corporately here, and then I'll talk a little bit about how I think customers perceive that. You know, we look at the cost per kilowatt hour and whether or not we're competitive within the North Central region, within our regional kind of comparisons. And currently today we're 7% below the regional average. But I would say this, and Director Gay, you saw the video yesterday of Judy, and you did too. And it has nothing to do with rates with her. It has to do with her house, her trailer, and the cost of that electricity to her pocketbook. So it could be less about the cost per kilowatt hour, and that is why we put together the demand side management initiatives. Is one of the examples, is how can we help customers that need that assistance reduce their bills and increase their ability for their own debt service coverage, right? And so I would say for us corporately, we may look at that regional piece, but I want us to begin to think about how does that impact the end-use customer on a given paycheck, so to speak, or their earnings or their net income. And so even if we're below the regional average, but we're creating hardship on customers because of the usage and those kinds of things, then I think as a utility, we have to help customers do that, use energy better, more efficiently, in a wiser way for them to have a lower impact on their bills.
Talking about the heat the streets with the energy assistance.
That's correct.
Video yesterday.
Yep.
Which is great. Yeah.
Dr. Barrett.
Tim, I have a question, and I'm going to read it to you, and then I'm going to unpeel it, and then for the next three candidates, I'm going to ask the same question. So, what leadership skills do you bring to this position? Please provide examples of how you have used these skills to improve the organization, period. And then I'm going to ask, one question is where is OPPD lacking? What is its weaknesses that people don't see, either the rank and file or the customers? Where is one of the glaring things that you would like to change if you were selected?
Okay. So a little bit about the kind of the culture piece, I think, is kind of where you're going from a leadership side.
How would you improve? But then I want to see a weakness. Instead of seeing happy roads, I want to see bumpy roads.
No, I think that's great.
Okay.
I would share this. I think from my perspective, I am an inclusive and collaborative leader, and I think I've talked a little bit about some of those examples. With the roundtable meetings that I have with my business unit employees, with the business unit meetings that I have, with the work that I do in meeting every single new employee. To me, that's a collaborative, inclusive, that's an engaging leader that begins to identify what's going on in the organization, good, bad, or indifferent. And so there are some examples where I've done that. I would share a couple other examples. I am the executive chair of the Young Professional Organization, and when I had the HR responsibility, a couple of the things that we put in place, and Sherry Hutcherson is here as well and had certainly a lot of responsibility in that as well, but it was really to drive young professional group, the organization, which is one of the strongest YPG groups in the metropolitan area. And I think it had something to do with my leadership around that. Our development of our OPPD Engineering Society, Society of Engineers, is another way to get our engineers together. It's a way to retain our employees. It's a way to have cross kind of conversations across engineers in our organization. And it's those kinds of initiatives that have been put in place that have really, I think, helped in a variety of different ways with employee retention. And I think that's a leadership responsibility. We have to be responsible for those kinds of things. So there are some examples of my collaborative and inclusive and engaging leadership style that I think has created value and benefit for OPPD. I would say that is not systematic across the organization. I would say that collaborative and inclusive leadership style is not systematic across the organization. It is not through all parts of the organization as well. And so my role as a leader is to essentially engage the other senior team with that. I think what you would see if you saw the quantum engagement survey or culture survey, you would see the organizations that do the things that we just talked about, that I just have done, whether it's roundtables or division unit meetings, you would see them rate higher in the organization than those that don't do and have that commitment to do those kinds of things. So my job as a leader would be to cascade that throughout the organization and really move OPPD to be one of the best places to work. And with that requires increased communication. It requires increased engagement and collaboration with leaders up and down the organization. And then it has a responsibility, I think, of a leader at the CEO level and at the senior management level to make sure that we have leaders that have the desire and the accountability to drive great leadership practices. And I think historically we have maybe looked at great technical folks in the organization, which we need in this organization, but that doesn't always essentially expand to great leaders. And so we want to make sure we have great leaders leading people. And that would be my responsibility as a CEO.
I got a follow-up question on that.
Thank you, Tim.
What if, or how do you enforce that, the culture that, let's say, you'd want to bring to leadership styles or developing leaders, or somebody's not doing? How would you enforce that? I mean,
well,
a CEO has to have a cultural,
sure.
Whether it's the new football coach at Nebraska or whatever. Here's the way I want to do it. How do you enforce it if they aren't doing it, or how would you go about doing that? And you can't change things overnight either. I know
sure,
that,
sure. No, and I appreciate that. I think part of it is we have a great kind of template in place where each of the senior team members have key accountabilities. This becomes one of their key accountabilities, to engage in their organization and engage across organizations. Then my role as a CEO is to kind of confirm and verify, is to kind of get out and identify, are we doing the things we're doing, and is it at the quality and at the level that I think is critical to move this organization to one of the best places to work organization. And that becomes my assessment of my leadership team, and certainly their assessment below. And then to look at other metrics that we may measure, certainly those roundtable meetings and those cross-functional roundtable meetings, and what are we hearing from employees? Are they seeing a better organization, a more collaborative, a more inclusive, a more dialogue that's occurring in the organization than they have previously? And if they haven't, then we may need to make some leadership and management changes in that regard. And I have not been afraid to do that, because if you don't do that, that becomes the spoils for really poor performance in areas that we don't want to have in our organization.
Thanks.
Tim, 33 years in the industry, you've seen lots and lots of changes over the time. My question is, how would you predict in the next 5 or 10 years where those changes will take us, and how do you plan on, how would you shape that?
Well, I think there's a couple things. I think there's kind of two components to this. As you kind of look out to the future, it's understanding those risks that might impact our business. And so And those risks could also be opportunities too. And I would share it this way. We have seen things impact our generating portfolio today. More wind in the market. I believe that we'll have utility-grade solar in that 5-year period of time. I think as you look at cost trends relative to solar, we'll be actively involved in utility-grade solar because it is at the pace of value. It makes sense economically for OPPD. But then how does that impact our other generation? And what are the impacts of that? And those are the things that we would have to spend time analyzing and understanding, because the way that we generate electricity and sell it into the market is much different today than what we used to do kind of in the old days just 2 years ago, where we sell it into SPP, we buy it back from SPP, and the assumption is our generation is cost effective enough to be sold, all of it, into SPP. I would predict that we will have some risks doing that in the future because of, I believe Nebraska will probably be a win for export. I believe other states that have high wind will be a win for export state. I think we'll see a lot of energy in the marketplace, and I think we'll have an impact on some of those standard and baseload generation units. And so how do we get ahead of that and understand that? And I think we've made a great step in our future generation plan, is really an anticipative kind of position on how we think about our future generation, where we're not investing a significant amount of dollars in old units that may not be economically productive in the marketplace in the future. So we kind of begin to made that decision to move forward with that. So it's those kinds of predictions that we would make, and then how would we mitigate the risks, but how would we look for the opportunities for us to be a leader in those areas so that we could have maybe more renewable energy into the marketplace. The rates that the board approved over the last couple of months on the green sponsorship rate is really about that trend about the future. We know that customers want green portfolios. Large customers want green portfolios in their mix. And so this was one that we went out and talked to customers about. Saw what was going on in the industry and began to put together a rate that allows us to offer those kinds of things for customers looking at the Omaha metropolitan area, and allows us to move from 33% to 50% of renewable resources, which is something, if we talked about this 3 years ago, I would say that was a trend that we were not talking about 3 years ago. We were talking about dabbling and getting in, and now we've made significant impacts because we saw those trends and that they were positive and they were at the pace of value, and now they contribute very positively to OPPD's bottom line and operation.
This is kind of a follow-up question. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Talking about older units that maybe are not really cost effective, how would you address this same question the next 5 to 10 years in regard to Fort Calhoun?
That's a great question. And I think we're seeing some of the impacts of that. I was just at a Nuclear Energy Institute meeting a couple weeks ago, and that was a focus of what was going on in Illinois, specifically with a variety of Exelon plants in Illinois, where they were going to the legislature asking for additional money because the market prices in that MISO market have depressed to a point where they're not able to make money in a competitive marketplace. Same thing in PJM, which is Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland RTO, or Regional Transmission Organization and Independent System Operator. Same kind of issues there, where we have seen significant reductions of prices and putting a lot of pressure on those nuclear plants. We have to understand that. What are those impacts to Fort Calhoun and our other generation? And then understand that, and how do we move forward, whatever that plan looks like. I would say with Fort Calhoun, there's a unique kind of circumstance that is before us that we'll have a little more clarity maybe by the middle to fall, and that's EPA 111D and the final proposed rulemaking that ought to come out of that. It still may be beneficial for us to continue to operate Fort Calhoun Nuclear Station in that kind of regulatory framework and environment because of the non-carbon, non-emission kind of characteristics around Fort Calhoun and how it may impact the other generation in the marketplace. So we'll have to look at those trends and what those trends look like, and then begin to create a plan and how we would execute that. So we'd have to be in a position to do that. And then sometimes that's looking at those opportunities, and sometimes it may be how do we mitigate that risk or that cost risk for us in the future. And so my job as a CEO would be to raise those issues to the board level, have that conversation, understand what the risks are, what the opportunities are, what the plan would be to kind of mitigate those kinds of things or take advantage of them, and then have that dialogue with the board and maybe even the public through a broader stakeholder education and knowledge and input process. Because it is a very complicated issue with a variety of variables, specifically as you look at natural gas, fracking costs, and supply cost. How does that impact any carbon tax that may occur with 111D or not occur? So there's a variety of variables that will have a little clearer picture in the August, September timeframe for us to begin to think about what that plan would look like.
Tim, on a follow-up, you were mentioning trends in the future and 5 to 10 years out. What is your definition of either global warming or climate change? And why do you hold those beliefs? And how do you think they're going to impact the utility industry and OPPD in specifically?
Well, I'll do the second half of that question first, because I think the conversation around global warming is impacting what's going on in this industry today relative to EPA regulations. And so there's a variety of scientific data that says there is climate change going on. Some folks would say, my grandfather would say, well, or my father-in-law would say, it's been going on for his 78 years of life. But there's true fact that there are changes going on. And those changes are being impacted by the environment. And so the federal government has said, here are some things that we need to do as a nation to essentially meet those kind of requirements to reduce emissions that would more positively impact the climate in this, certainly in this country and possibly around the world. I think we as good stewards have to be responsible to those regulations. Now, we may not necessarily agree about how they're done or maybe some of the estimates, and so it's our job to say, you know, 111D is a great example. We didn't agree with all the components, even though we're positioned well for 111D. We didn't agree with all the components in there and some of the estimates that were made, and it's our job to essentially share that. We don't believe this policy has all the right components in there or the right estimates around that, and I think that's our job as a utility industry. Our second job is to make sure that we essentially execute the regulations in the manner in which they were intended to be executed.
All right, thank you.
Got a follow-up question to the industry. So you mentioned we are in a competitive, changing marketplace due to regulatory, all the above. But I guess the thing is, what do you think the benefits are of being a public power, but not just us, but as a whole state? We're kind of obviously very unique. What are the benefits of that, and what are the detriments of that in your mind going forward as we deal with these changes?
Yeah, great question. I would say, coming from the investor-owned side of the equation, what I really appreciated was the ability to do long-term looks for the benefit of the customer owners. And I think OPPD has done that incredibly well. The ability to look at diversity in our generating portfolio, the ability to expand transmission distribution for reliability, for growth and development, for all those kinds of things, to really look long-term, where we may not necessarily be looking at that quarterly earnings report that may drive us to make different decisions on a very short-term basis. What's happening in the marketplace that's going to put pressure on that is that the marketplace will be changing fairly rapidly. So how can we as a public power entity begin to move the ship relatively quick? How can we be more nimble, more flexible in how we begin to put together our strategies to whatever that future energy marketplace looks like? And the example would be the Future Generation Plan is a great example of that. It is meant to be more flexible and nimble. We've laid out some guidelines about what we believe it is, some diversity around that, but we have a lot of flexibility as we kind of move forward about whether or not the example would be, do we want to convert 4 and 5 to natural gas, or do we want to build a bigger, broader natural gas combined cycle? We'll have that opportunity to make that decision with better information and knowledge than we do today. But it's that kind of nimbleness and flexibility that I think we've built into the plan, and that we are kind of building into the the generation risk model where I don't have so much excess generation that I have a stranded asset that's degrading the organization or financially harming the organization. So we've really positioned ourselves well in that regard. But I think it's that flexibility and that nimbleness that we're going to have to be able to move faster and quicker, which means people will have to have better information. Boards will have to have better information, more accurate information, and we'll have to agree on kind of what's that look like in the future. And maybe we move that area, but in 3 more years, we're going to have to adjust again. And so it'll be that flexibility. I think there will be areas that we can look long-term, 30 and 40 years. Transmission may be the example of that. But on the distribution side, depending on what you believe on distributed generation, customers getting more involved in their own energy generation or supply, whether it be solar or any other technology that may come into play, I think we are going to have to be nimble and think about how we're going to respond to that.
Thank you.
Ann?
Okay. And I've got the last question. If you would become our president and CEO, what would your plan be for the first 90 days?
Well, well, certainly in the first process, we put together a nice 90-day transition plan. A part of that would be, and I'll just go by memory here on it, is a couple things. Is one, getting alignment around the senior team. We have an exceptional senior team, folks that are recognized in the industry for some of the great work that they do, whether that's on our operating side, our finance side, and certainly our HR and IT and the work that we're doing around that. We have a great senior team, and so my job would be to make sure that we have alignment around the senior team, but also to meet with individual board members to talk about what are your concerns, what are your issues, what do you want to see, what's working well, what's not working well, what are the roadblocks that you see from a CEO board relationship, from a board organizational relationship, and for me to kind of bring that plan, share with our senior team, and then come back to you with here's what I think we can do, and here's what I heard independently, but here are some things that we can do kind of systematically with that CEO, senior management, board relationship. The next that I would do is essentially cascade through the organization, because I think the organization, what's really been kind of interesting over the last 60 days or so, is I have really felt good about the employee reach out to me. Even though the first phase didn't necessarily move all the way through, it's been great to hear from the employees to say we're hopefully you're the next candidate. We're hopefully you're going to be in the next process. We hope you to be our CEO because we think you can kind of get us to where we need to go. And they're looking for that direction, that leadership, that kind of capability. The next would be industry folks, from NRC to Region 4 to NEI to INPO to LPPC to FERC to NERC, to begin to develop those relationships about our company, our organization, and I already have a lot of relationships in those areas, but it's really to begin to kind of sort through that. We'll be moving fairly quickly to an April public meeting around our 0350 classification. So it's to meet with individually that team, that 0350 team, Tony Vagel and Mike Hay and the rest of the team, as well as our NSRB, just to get their perspective and feedback about what do we need to be doing differently. So it's kind of that reach out to really seek to understand, and then to begin to kind of accumulate that information and to begin to craft what I believe would be a good execution strategy on those kinds of things. From the community perspective, I'm pretty well linked in the community in some of the roles that I have, whether it be at the chamber and on the different boards and committees that I've served on, or the work that I've done in the legislature, or with the governor's office and some of the key heads in those areas. Even though they're new, we've had some relationships and conversations with them already. So I feel relatively connected in that, and also have received some great feedbacks from members of that business community and the overall community. So those would kind of be my steps, and then to begin to create what that plan would look like going forward, and whether it would be that plan that I talked about, going out to the public, doing these between now and the end of the year, 4 actively annual meeting-like meetings in the public, to begin to share the things that we heard in all of these kind of outreaches over that first 90 days. And so that would be my plan, to begin to execute that and bring that back to the board with an overall plan of what it looks like between now and the end of the year.
You didn't mention Exelon. How would you, since you don't really have a nuclear engineer background, how would you bolster that relationship between Exelon and yourself?
Well,
as far as
yeah.
making sure you have better corporate communications with Exelon?
Great. I think that there's a couple things that have been very clear with some of the work that we've done with them on some of the evaluating things that we've done, and they are part of that nuclear stakeholder group. Certainly, the leadership at Exelon, but also Lou in his role as chief nuclear officer. Those relationships have to be very, very good, open and honest and direct. My active role would be to be more involved in some of the MRM and some of the Nuclear Safety Review Board kind of activity. And it's been very clear that that's an expectation that is in the industry of just not the CEO, but other members of the executive team and board that probably need to be more actively involved in those kinds of things. But my relationship to Exelon is one where it has to be, they are our business partner or contractor, so to speak, to have the leadership to operate that plant, but we have to hold them accountable to deliver the things that we believe we need to have at that nuclear plant and the level that we need to perform at that nuclear plant. And we need to do that together. But again, it's my role to make sure we're doing that in a manner that matches the OPPD culture as well. And so my reach out to the employees and the management team and the manners which I've talked about previously would kind of complement that role at that executive level with Exelon.
Thank you.
This concludes the structured questions portion of Mr. Burke's interview. Do any directors have any questions they would like to ask, not related to the what's already been covered? Keeping in mind, if any of the questions might be of a sensitive nature, they feel more comfortable with, we will have a closed session later on with Mr. Burke. Is there anything you'd like to ask now prior to into executive session?
I have one. The unions that represent OPPD, how would you describe the relationship between management and labor? And what would you do to improve it or make it function more efficiently?
Well, in the 90-day plan, that is one of the reach outs that I would do with each of the members of the executive group of the unions. They are partners in what we do. They're part and extension of our employees as well, and so they would be a reach out. I would commit no differently than I would to other kinds of employee meetings, is to sit down with that leadership, the president of each of the three unions that are at OPPD, in that same way, where I would meet with them 4 times a year. What's going well? What's not going well? What are the roadblocks? What are the victories? What are things we need to be working on? Here are some things that we need to be thinking about together. Many of the things that I've done in my business unit has been in conjunction and partnership with the collective bargaining units. And I know Danny, Bagley's here, and he would say, don't always agree with Tim, and I understand that, but we're able to continue to dialogue and continue the conversation and find a solution that I think is in the best interest of employees and the company as well. And so that would be my commitment to the board. That'd be my commitment to the unions, is to be open and direct with that kind of conversation and work to find solutions on things that we need to find solutions for.
Thank you.
Okay, at this point, Ann, I'm going to make a motion to go into closed session. Before I do that, before we vote, are we still on schedule to reopen the public portion of this process at 2 o'clock?
Yeah, I think this is actually, it's going to be a separate meeting. We'll come back after our closed session to see if anyone's here and close the meeting. Is that what we have to do? And then we're going to open a new meeting at 2 o'clock. And we appreciate everyone coming today. If you want to come back at 2 o'clock, you're certainly welcome. It's going to be on videotape. We're hoping to get this up as soon as possible online, even tonight, I believe. Is that correct?
Would that be after Monday? Aren't there 2 other interviews?
Yes,
Monday?
well, that's going to be up.
Wait till after those Monday interviews, or they could watch exactly what everyone's saying.
Oh, that's a good point.
We're trying to be fair
oh,
to
yeah.
everybody.
Well, that's a good point. I didn't think about the other interviewees.
I just
When
say we
we're all
wait till
done, that's a good
Can
idea.
we,
Well, if I
That's a
was a
good
candidate, I'd have a spot here, wouldn't you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe they are.
Maybe they are. Anyway.
I would wait one day.
so I guess we're gonna wait, and as soon as that last person is in the,
Yeah,
we
that's
can work
what
on
you
getting
gotta do
that
when you do
going,
it like this.
as far as putting it on. And so it's 2:00 today, again, we'll re-adjourn for the open meeting. And then tomorrow, we'll also have another open meeting at 9:00 and then at 1:30 for those the two other interviews.
Okay.
Okay?
At this point, I move that the board go into closed session at 12:26 PM for discussion of confidential business information or sensitive personnel issues relating or involving the individual being interviewed. A closed session is necessary for the protection of the public interest and to prevent needless injury to the reputation of persons who have not requested a public hearing. The closed session will be limited to confidential business information or sensitive personnel matters involving the individual being interviewed in connection with the search and selection of the president and CEO of the Omaha Public Power District.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion?
I've got a question. How is confidential business information work into this procedure?
We can discuss that afterwards. If you want to, Mr. Bruckner will discuss that with you afterwards, okay?
Well, no, you're making a motion to go into executive session. You have to give specific reasons. And
Those reasons were given, Mr. Perquani. You can
Yes,
go
we
ahead.
can go
I
ahead
was
with
asking the
vote.
question. How would you?
You can discuss that with Mr. Bruckner afterwards, okay?
Call for the vote.
Call the vote.
Call for the vote.
Yes.
Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Gay?
Yes.
Green?
Yes.
Hurley?
Yes.
McGuire?
Yes.
Mines?
Yes.
Ulrich?
Yes.
Motion carried. You have to read.
Oh,